In 1982, every teenager in the Western world shared the same secret. It was a poster pinned to the back of a bedroom door. A girl with dark, exotic eyes and a red bikini that seemed to stop the rotation of the earth. Phoebe Cates wasn't just an actress. She was a siren. She was the face that defined the American summer. But look at the woman in this window today. She isn't hiding in a rehab clinic. She isn't begging for a reality show comeback. She is standing behind a cash register in a quiet shop on Madison Avenue, selling wooden toys and vintage candy. This is a woman who walked away from $100 million empire just so she could finally stop being the girl in the pool. Why did the world's most desired woman choose to become a nobody? The industry will tell you she just aged out. They'll tell you she chose family over fame and leave it at that. They are lying. The smoking gun of her disappearance wasn't a bad movie or a lost role. It was a conversation that took place in the punishing heat of a desert in Israel in 1981. A conversation between a frightened 17-year-old girl and the father she trusted more than anyone in the world. It was a betrayal so profound, it broke her love for the screen before her career even truly began. Today, for the first time, we investigate the specific scene that convinced Phoebe Cates that Hollywood didn't want her heart. They only wanted her skin. This isn't a story of a tragic fall. It is a story of a voluntary vanishing. It's a cautionary tale about the high price of being a dream. How does a girl with a Juilliard education and the world at her feet decide that selling toys is more honorable than winning an Oscar? Today, we go behind the bikini and the billboard. We look at the contract that felt like a cage and the secret pact she made with her husband to leave the lights behind forever. This is the heartbreaking reality of Phoebe Cates. To understand the end, we have to go back to the desert. The desert doesn't care who you are. In 1981, under a white punishing sun, the sand stretched on forever. No applause, no spotlights, no second takes. Just heat, silence, and a 17-year-old girl standing at the edge of a decision she wasn't old enough to understand. Phoebe Cates was a child of the machine. Her father, Joseph Cates, was a legendary television producer. Her uncle was a director. Fame wasn't a dream for her. It was the family business. But Phoebe didn't want to be a celebrity. She was a student of craft. She had studied at Juilliard. She wanted to act. She was cast as the lead in a film called Paradise. It was Hollywood's desperate attempt to replicate the success of the Blue Lagoon. Two teenagers stranded in the wild, discovering their bodies, discovering love. But Phoebe was terrified. The script called for full, graphic nudity. She was still a minor in her heart. She felt the eyes of the world creeping toward her before the cameras even rolled. She turned to the only person she believed would protect her, her father. She voiced her fear. She asked him, "Dad, do I have to do this? Is this what it takes?" Joseph Cates, the man who should have been her shield, gave her the answer of a producer, not a parent. He told her, "Don't doubt a leading role. Don't worry about the nudity. Opportunities like this don't come twice." Out there in the desert, that advice didn't sound cruel. It sounded practical. It sounded like love filtered through ambition. And so, she said yes. But the cruel voice of fate had a darker twist waiting in the editing room. When the film was released, the damage became clear. According to accounts from that period, the producers had lied. For the most intimate scenes, they had used a body double without telling her, a woman whose body didn't even look like hers. The industry let the audience believe the illusion was seamless. To the world, they were seeing Phoebe. To her, she had been violated twice, first by the camera, and then by a lie she never authorized. She didn't storm talk shows. She didn't defend herself in interviews. Reports suggested she simply withdrew. No press tour, no smiling explanations. For a teenager in Hollywood, silence is often interpreted as consent, but silence can also be shock. Standing in that desert, she wasn't a symbol. She was a minor being asked to absorb an adult industry's expectations. Her father hadn't orchestrated the system, but he spoke its language fluently. He became its translator inside her own home. The siren was born that year, but inside, the girl was already looking for the exit. 1982. A hot, stagnant summer in California. It was a scene that lasted exactly 10 seconds. A girl rises slowly from a swimming pool. Water rolls off her shoulders. A red bikini catches the light. The camera lingers just long enough for the audience to stop breathing. For the millions of people in the theater, it was a coming-of-age moment. It was the birth of a legend. But for Phoebe Cates, those 10 seconds were a prison sentence. You see, Phoebe was a student of the prestigious Juilliard School. She was a woman who could recite Shakespeare with precision. She understood the weight of a character's soul, the architecture of a performance. But the moment she stepped out of that water, the world stopped caring about her soul. They only cared about the mirage. She had become what she would later call bait. She was the face of the teensploitation era, an industry that turned the innocence of youth into a high-margin product. While culture doesn't always choose what it consumes, sometimes it fixates. And when it fixated on Phoebe, it froze her in time. Every time she walked down a city street, she saw her own body staring back at her from newsstands. She saw the eyes of men 3 times her age, looking at her with a hunger she didn't authorize. She felt like a statue that had been formed in real time, perfectly lit, perfectly silent, and completely immobile. While her peers were out celebrating their fame, Phoebe was retreating. She felt a deep, quiet disgust. She realized the siren had eaten the actress. She told a reporter years later, "I felt like a stranger looking at a dead person." Think about that. To be the most desired girl in the world, and to feel like you are already a ghost. She wasn't an icon to herself. She was the physical toll of a business that refused to let her grow up. This scene didn't launch her forward. It locked her in place. And Hollywood, satisfied with the image it had captured, never bothered to ask if she wanted to move. There is a moment in every investigation when you realize the crime didn't begin where everyone is looking. It began earlier, quieter. Behind every falling star, there is a hidden antagonist. For Phoebe Cates, it wasn't a rival actress or a director's cruelty. It was the assembly line of desire. In the early 80 seconds, Hollywood discovered a formula that worked too well. Youth. Suggestion. Just enough provocation to sell tickets, just enough innocence to feel safe. They weren't chasing stories, they were chasing reactions, and Phoebe was the perfect raw material for this machine. She was a mix of Russian, Jewish, and Chinese heritage, of Phi Thuk Thuk, an unreal beauty that the cameras couldn't get enough of. The industry had a template, and they spent every day trying to force her to fit it. But Phoebe had a hidden weapon against this antagonist: extreme sanity. Most young stars would have been intoxicated by the invitations to Studio 54. They would have loved the attention of the powerful men in Italian suits. But Phoebe found it hollow. She saw the tragedy coming before it even hit her. She watched the women who came before her, how they were worshipped for a season and discarded the moment the paint began to crack. She realized that Hollywood didn't want her to act. They wanted her to exist as an object of consumption. Her father had told her not to worry about the nudity, that it was just work. But the system had made the nudity the only thing that mattered. She began to feel a ji-elan, a chilling coldness toward the limelight. This wasn't a unique story. Dozens of performers passed through the same machine. Most adapted, some burned out. A few disappeared entirely. What made Phoebe different was her timing. She saw the pattern while she still had something to lose. Awareness in Hollywood is rarely encouraged. It complicates the transaction. The assembly line thrives on momentum, not reflection. It needs faces that won't ask why they're being photographed from certain angles. But Phoebe was already asking. She told an interviewer in 1988, "I only felt happy being an actor for about 2 years. The rest was just noise." The hidden antagonist had tried to buy her identity. But Phoebe Cates was the only star in town who knew that her soul was not for sale. She was about to perform what the industry calls financial suicide, but what she called survival. Hollywood measures belief in dollars. It is a town that speaks in projections, and by the mid-1980 seconds, the math surrounding Phoebe Cates was straightforward. She was a gold mine. She was the face of the Brat Pack era, a bankable asset with an image the market already understood how to exploit. In the secret meetings of studio executives, her name was being linked to the kind of trajectory that leads to the mountaintop. The comparisons were quiet but consistent. The idea was that she would anchor prestige romantic leads, transitioning into the kind of generational stardom that would later define A-list careers like that of Julia Roberts. Experts estimate that if she had stayed on that path, if she had played the game for just one more decade, she would have built a financial empire worth over $100 million. She was on the $20 million per movie track. But Phoebe Cates performed what the industry calls financial suicide. At the age of 31, just as her earning power was reaching its absolute peak, she closed the vault. She didn't just decline a role, she declined the entire currency of fame. Where did that potential fortune go? It didn't go to a scandalous lifestyle or a series of bad investments. It went to something far more expensive in Hollywood: time. She traded a $100 million legacy for a small, quiet shop on the Upper East Side called Blue Tree. If you walk past that storefront today, you might see a woman in her 60s straightening the shelves, helping a neighbor pick out a gift, or quietly discussing inventory with a clerk. She is standing behind a cash register instead of a movie camera. To the accountants of Los Angeles, this is a tragedy of wasted potential, a financial collapse. But for Phoebe, the money wasn't neutral. It came attached to obligations that felt like chains. Every big check reinforced the same identity. Every contract narrowed the future. She told a visitor to her shop years later, "People ask why I'm here selling toys. I tell them that at least here, I know exactly what I'm selling. In Hollywood, they sell your soul without even asking your opinion." She chose to be soul rich instead of industry famous. She understood a truth the system works hard to conceal, that a quiet life is often more expensive than a loud one. She paid for her autonomy with a fortune she refused to earn. She is the only player from the 80 seconds who won the game, by quitting while she was still holding all the high cards. There is a physical toll that every 80 seconds icon is eventually forced to pay. It's the price of being a masterpiece in a town that hates the way paint cracks over time. Hollywood is a business built on the continuity of fantasy. It demands that its sirens remain frozen, archived in a state of permanent desire. For Phoebe Cates, the toll was unique. She possessed a Phi Thuk Thuk, an unreal beauty born of Russian, Jewish, and Chinese blood. The camera didn't just record her face, it worshipped it. Those sharp cheekbones, those dark, heavy-lidded eyes. She was a shortcut to a fantasy packaged for mass consumption. But the cruelty of time has no favorites. Most women who were as beautiful as Phoebe spend their 50s and 60s in a desperate war with the mirror. They use the fillers. They use the Botox. They undergo the surgeries to freeze the siren in place so the world doesn't stop looking. They treat aging as a failure to maintain the product. But look at Phoebe today. She is one of the rare ones. She said no to the needles. She said no to the lies. She has allowed the siren to dissolve. She has accepted her wrinkles as a badge of her disappearance. To a culture that treats constant exposure as validation, her aging is a radical statement. For some, it feels unsettling to see the girl in the red bikini grow old. It reminds them that they are aging too. It disrupts the exchange. But for Phoebe, this is the final victory. By letting herself age naturally, out of sight and out of frame, she has made herself unrecognizable to the hunters of Hollywood. She can walk through Central Park without a bodyguard. She can buy a coffee without a paparazzi flash. The physical toll she paid was the loss of her icon status, and she paid it gladly. She has become un ngui la, a stranger on her own terms. The girl in the pool is gone. In her place is a woman who isn't afraid of the sun. But as she found her peace in the shadows, the world still wanted to know, what was the turning point? What was the single moment that finally closed the door for good? Visual note. The screen fades to a deep purple. A silhouette of Phoebe and her husband, Kevin Kline, appears, walking away from the camera into a soft, white light. Coming up, the secret pact that changed everything. The 1991 movie that should have been her comeback but became her final exit. Every career has a what-if moment, a crossroad where the path splits into two entirely different lives. For Phoebe Cates, that moment arrived in 1991. She was 28 years old. The neon haze of the 80 seconds had faded, and she was ready to reinvent herself. She had survived the bikini years and the teen comedy machine. She had proven her range in drama and on the stage. Hollywood was finally ready to let her grow up. She was cast in a movie that would become a massive cultural touchstone, Father of the Bride. She was set to play the daughter, the emotional heart of the story, opposite Steve Martin. It was the perfect transition role. It was the path that leads from teen dream to American sweetheart. It was her ticket to the permanent A-list. But then the cruel voice of fate intervened. Just before filming was set to begin, Phoebe discovered she was pregnant with her first child, Owen. In Hollywood, actresses are often told they can have it all. The industry has a system for motherhood: hire the nannies, keep the trainers, and get back to the set 6 weeks after birth. Maintain the momentum at all costs. But Phoebe and her husband, the Oscar-winning actor Kevin Kline, had made a secret pact. It was a radical agreement that few in the industry ever dare to follow. They agreed that they would never both work at the same time. If one was on a film set, the other would be at home. They refused to let their children be raised by strangers in the back of a production trailer. Phoebe looked at the script for Father of the Bride. She looked at the prestigious life waiting for her in the hills of Los Angeles. And then, she looked at the life growing inside her. She walked away. She gave the role to Kimberly Williams. She stayed in her New York apartment and watched from a distance as the movie became a global hit, launching a new star in her place. But according to those close to her, she didn't feel regret. She felt relief. For our audience, you know the weight of that choice. You know the moment in your own life when you decided that real life was more important than a resume. For Phoebe, this wasn't just a missed role. It was the official end of her status as a muse. She chose to be a mother, and in doing so, she realized she never wanted to be an object of the industry again. The door didn't just close. She locked it from the inside and threw away the key. To hear a woman's truth, you have to listen to the words she whispered while the world was too busy staring at her body. The archives of Phoebe Cates are filled with forgotten quotes, fragments of honesty that act like a trail of breadcrumbs leading out of the Hollywood forest. In 1982, at the absolute peak of the pool scene madness, she spoke to a reporter with a clarity that was terrifying for a 19-year-old. She said, "In this business, if you have a good body, why not show it? But they never ask if I have a brain. Think about that." While millions were projecting their fantasies onto her, she was already feeling the hollow at the center of the spotlight. She was a Juilliard-trained artist being treated like a piece of promotional material. She was screaming for respect, but the world only wanted the bikini. Then came 1988, the year the assembly line began to slow down. She admitted to a friend, "I only felt happy being an actress for about 2 years. After that, it felt like looking at a stranger who had died." This is the psychological toll of fame that we rarely discuss. She wasn't just tired of the work, she was experiencing dissociation. The girl on the screen, the one the world worshipped, was a stranger to her. She felt like she was living in the shadow of a corpse. And finally, there is the quote that defines her life today, spoken in 2006 from behind the counter of her shop on Madison Avenue. A customer, recognizing her, asked if she missed the movies. Phoebe looked at the shelves of toys and said, "At least here, I know exactly what I'm selling. In Hollywood, they sell your soul without even asking your opinion." That is the moral of the investigation. She realized that in the Hollywood machine, the star isn't the owner. The star is the product. And Phoebe Cates didn't want to be a product anymore. She wanted to be the seller. She traded the golden cage for a wooden storefront. She traded the male gaze for the eyes of her children. And in doing so, she became the only legend of the 80 seconds who didn't just survive the era, she escaped it with her soul intact. But as she found her sanctuary, the cruel voice of fate was already turning its attention to another legend, one who couldn't walk away. One who stayed until the screams stopped and the silence became a death sentence. Today, if you walk into that small shop on Madison Avenue, you won't see a movie star. Today, having movie star, you will see a woman who looks entirely comfortable in her own skin. She might be helping a neighbor find a birthday gift or quietly discussing the morning's inventory with a clerk. To the passing world, she is a forgotten legend. To herself, she is finally Thukte real. There is a common misconception in our culture that stars who leave the spotlight have failed. We assume they were pushed out, that they aged out, or that they lost their it factor. But Phoebe Cates didn't fail Hollywood. She fired Hollywood. She looked at the contracts. She looked at the male gaze that had reduced her entire existence to a 10-second pool scene, and she decided she was worth more than a ticket price. She chose a life that most celebrities are terrified of, a life where no one is looking. Her marriage to Kevin Kline has lasted over 35 years. In the volatile ecosystem of Hollywood, that isn't just a relationship, it is a miracle. It happened because they prioritized the secret pact over the spotlight. They raised their children in the middle of New York City, far from the toxic whispers and the artificial light of the Hollywood hills. Phoebe's children grew up knowing a mother, not a poster girl. While her peers were chasing the next big thing, while they were battling the physical toll with needles, despair, and public breakdowns, Phoebe was building a sanctuary. Her shop, Blue Tree, isn't just a business. It is a refuge. It is the physical manifestation of her choice. It is the place where the siren finally became a woman. She showed us that the ultimate power move in a world that demands your constant attention is to simply walk away. She won the war by refusing to fight it. She is the only girl from the 80 seconds who kept the one thing Hollywood tries to steal from everyone: her dignity. So, what is the final verdict in the vanishing of Phoebe Cates? To the generation that pinned her to their bedroom walls, her story is a reminder of the identity trap. We live in a world that tries to tell us who we are before we have a chance to find out for ourselves. We are told to be sweethearts, icons, or products. We are told that our value is measured by how many people are looking at us. Phoebe Cates realized that fame is not a gift. It is a loan. And the interest rate is your very soul. She paid the loan back early. She walked away from $100 million empire so she could own her own heart. She showed us that it is better to be a nobody in a world you love than a somebody in a cage you hate. May we all find the courage to leave the pool and find our own Madison Avenue. Thanks for watching. If you are Dawn App and Henri in the next film, Phoebe Cates chose the silence of a shop. She found her peace in the shadows. But for another legend, the silence was a death sentence. In the era just before Phoebe's pool scene, there was a man who was the god of the teen idols. He sold millions of records. He was the face of the Partridge Family. He was earning $250,000 every single week while he was still just a boy. But unlike Phoebe, he couldn't walk away. He was addicted to the screams, and when the screams eventually stopped, the hidden antagonist arrived in a bottle. While Phoebe was raising her children in the safety of New York, this legend was drowning in a mansion he could no longer afford. Losing his memory, losing his dignity, and hiding a smoking gun that would only be revealed in his final hours. On his deathbed, he looked at his family and whispered 3 words that shattered the teen idol myth forever. He confessed to a secret lie that he had been carrying for 50 years, a lie that turned his Partridge perfection into a tragic charade. You think you know the cost of being the most loved boy in America? You think you know what happens when the god of the stage finally falls? Click the video on your screen right now to uncover the heartbreaking end of the 70 seconds greatest superstar. The truth is lonelier than a shop on Madison Avenue. The file is open. Are you ready to hear the words, "I lied"?